And welcome back to Anton Math. Now we're going to do our last practice problem for graphing polar equations. We chose an interesting one. Sketch r equals 2 sine 3 theta. Now we can remember that when we have an equation of this type, we're looking at a rows, and because my n here is 3, I'm looking at a 3-leafed rows. Remember, when n is even, we double that number. If this was 2 sine 4 theta, I would have an 8-leafed rows, but here I'm just going to have a 3-leafed rows. Now before we start drawing our reference graph, I have this 3 here, so we have to keep in mind that my period is 2 pi over 3, and I have an amplitude change of 2. So let's go ahead and draw that reference graph, and I'm going to make it a little bit bigger. The reason is, if we take a look at this equation here, we notice that I don't have any of my symmetries. None of my symmetry tests are going to pass for this problem. So we're going to need to draw out everything, and instead of cutting this in, well, I'll cut it in half for pi, but I'm really concerned with looking at 2 pi over 3, because that's the end of my first period, and 4 pi over 3, that's the beginning of my third period. So now I can cut this up a little bit more. Half of 2 pi over 3 is just pi over 3. Here I'll have pi over 6. So here, in between here, I'm going to have 3 pi over 6, which is actually just pi over 2. So that's my first period there. We'll cut this up a little bit as well. Here I'll have my 5 pi over 6. Here I have 7 pi over 6. Over here, between 4 pi over 3 and 2 pi, I have 5 pi over 3. Then I'm going to have 11 pi over 6. And then between 4 pi over 3 and 5 pi over 3, I have 3 pi over 2. So this is going to give us some of these values we need. Now, incorporating my amplitude of 2, I'm going to go up to 2 and down to negative 2. And we don't have a negative sign or anything like that, so we can go ahead and draw this graph out. All 3 periods. See, my intervals are a little bit off, but we should be okay. And we're done. All right, reference graph completed. Now let's take a look at what we're going to get when we start to graph this out. So let me draw my polar axis down here. Oh, let's make that a straight line. Here's my polar axis. I need to measure out 1, 2. I'm interested in a whole bunch of reference lines, and I'm going to put those reference lines somewhere else so we can get rid of them later. And even, let's space this out a little bit. Sorry about this, guys. Let me space this out. I want a little more space here. Let's call this 1, and let's call this 2 over here. There we go. Now drawing in some of these reference lines. I need a whole bunch of these. I need at pi over 6, pi over 3, 2 pi over 3, 5 pi over 6, and there we go. So that gives me all these reference lines I need, quite a few of them. And let's go ahead and put in some circles to help us out as well. I only really need a circle for 2. We don't really hit 1 on any of these key points, so a circle at 1 is not going to be necessary. And let's draw in our graph. So from angle 0 to pi over 6, I am going from 0 to 2. Oh, that's not what I want. Going from 0 to 2. And then from pi over 6 to pi over 3, I'm coming back from 2 back down to 0. Pi over 3 to pi over 2, I'm going in the negative direction now. So even though I'm going to be traveling up here in terms of my angle, I'm going to be down here where I'm drawing. So I'm going from 0 to negative 2, and then from negative 2 back to 0 when I go from pi over 2 to 2 pi over 3. From 2 pi over 3 to 5 pi over 6, I am going from 0 to positive 2. And then 5 pi over 6 to pi, I'm going from 2 back to 0. And now from here, we're going to see a little bit of repetition. From pi to 7 pi over 6, so that's this right here. And actually, let's look at pi to 4 pi over 3. We'll know 7 pi over 6 is where we peak out. I'm starting at 0, going to negative 2, and then coming back to 0. Now, because I'm going in the negative direction, I'm actually going to be retracing this first leaf that we drew. All right, take a look, make sure you see this. I'm double layering now. As I go from pi to 7 pi over 6, I'm doing this first line we drew. That's the same as going in the positive direction from 0 to pi over 6. And the negative direction of 7 pi over 6 to 4 pi over 3, that's the same as the positive direction that we already drew from pi over 6 to pi over 3. And so for the next couple of branches, we're actually going to retrace this entire shape again. Okay, so we don't need to do anything else. We're actually done with the graph. We could double layer it, but we don't actually have to draw a double layered line just because it passes over it twice. So we're done. Let's go ahead and take this away. We can get a good view at this. So this is one of our three-leaved roses. This is what a three-leafed rose looks like. And in general, those three-leafed roses, they're not going to have any real symmetries going on. For cosine, it'll be oriented in a way that you will have the symmetry over the polar axis, but just the symmetry over the polar axis. All right, now make sure you do some of these practice problems on your own. Get ready for your homework and tests. They're a little bit tricky, but once you get a hang of it, they're not too bad and they're actually kind of fun, aren't they? All right, now in the next chapter, or the next section of this chapter, we're going to start talking about the polar form of complex numbers. So we'll see you over there.